All right, welcome back to another tutorial in Maya. Today we're going to look at render layers. And as you can see right now, I have just sort of a simple scene going here. It's just a gallery scene and, nothing too complicated. And I'm using render layers in order to get this render. And if you look over here, you can notice there's a render tab and then some render layers going on here. And that's in your channel box and layer editor right here. Okay, so just choose render. And here's the scene as it is. It's fairly simple, just some pictures attached to some planes, some simple geometry, and a model I found. This is like one of those free 3D models somewhere from Furniture Company or somebody that put it out there on the web. So thank you, whoever did that. Cool little sofa sectional. Okay. Let's take a look at the scene as it stands here. I have a number of lights going in here, and essentially I'm using the light linker a lot. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the light linker, come down to your relationship editors, go to your light linking. You got either light centric or object centric. It doesn't really matter because we can always switch it up. But here's a listing of all your lights, and here's what the objects they're going to affect. So in terms of the spotlight, I've got all these going, the spotlight there. It's not affecting this one plane. This area light sort of affects everything. The point light is not affecting the plane or the cube or the pillars. Point light 2, same thing. The ambient light technically is affecting everything, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And, so just got some other spotlights going here, and that's it. Okay, so no big deal, but really I paid close attention to what these lights were linked to because in this case, I only wanted these little point lights to kind of affect the areas that they're in. So I have this point light linked to the sofa here, and this one as well, and this might also be affecting, the geometry right here. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And I also have an ambient light up here, which when I move it up and down can kind of cause some color variations in the flooring down here. So no big deal. It's a real simple scene. You can see where these lights are coming in from here to here to here. And yeah, that's it. So let's get on with it. And I want to show you sort of how we set these layers up, what to look for as you're doing that, and kind of how and why you would do this. How? It's real easy. We just assign objects to layers. And why is because when you composite these, let me show you the render. When you bring this into a compositing package, you have complete control over your ambient occlusion, your color and your lighting. And so, if you have a 600 frame sequence going, well, Maya's going to output 600 colors or 600 frames for the color channel, 600 for the ambient occlusion, and 600 for the direct screen or the lighting. So you can sort of raise or lower these values in your compositing package after the fact and have even greater control, which is really cool. Okay, so this is kind of how I'm getting this, and let's take a look at the layers as they are here. Okay, so the first thing you have to always be aware of is that your master layer, anything that you add to this scene will automatically be added to the master layer. For example, I'm going to switch over here to my perspective cam, and we'll kind of zoom out there. You can see the scene. I have an alternative background behind here in case I want to use it, but in this case, I'm just sort of going with this simple geometry. But what we want to do is take a look at what everything technically is on this master layer by default. So no matter what you add, if I create something and I create a polygon, let's just create a sphere. We'll kind of put a sphere in there. Well, it's on the master layer, but if I switch over to the color layer, for example, you'll see that it's not there. Likewise, if I go into my direct layer, it's not there as well. So we have to really always pay attention to what we're doing when we create objects and what layers they are assigned to. So in the master layer right now, because it's assigned to that master layer, I'm just going to basically want to add it to the other layers. So that's as simple as clicking on your channel over here, do a right mouse click and add that selected object. Okay? So now it appears on that layer. I'm going to do the same thing for the ambient occlusion. Might take a moment on the ambient occlusion because it's a much, it's render intensive. Okay? So anyway. Let's see, any second it should pop up. There it is. And then we'll go to the direct, and I'm going to right mouse click, add selected object. And, you know, that's how you do that. Now to remove it, it's as simple as just right mouse clicking and come down, remove the selected object. On the ambient occlusion, since it's selected, I'm just going to right mouse click and remove that object. I'll do the same thing for the color. We'll remove it. And there you go. It will stay on the master layer, but I'm going to delete it from the master layer. But if I right mouse click on here and remove it, you'll get a warning saying, hey, you know, you can't do that this way. So what you might have to do is come over into your outliner and choose your sphere from there, what you created, and hit delete. Okay, so now it's gone. Now, it's very you have to be very careful when you're changing things up with these render layers. For example, if I want to change this texture right here, maybe add some more color or something, I might want to go ahead and just select it. I'm in my master layer. I'll go ahead and we'll assign it a different material. In this case, I think it's Lambert 14. We'll assign it a different material. Okay, so there it is. So now we added a little color to this scene. And there it is, okay? But remember, that just because we changed it here does not mean that it really changed in these layers as well. So just for example, I'm going to go to the color channel, and I'm going to sort of just deselect these layers for the moment and just look at the color. And I'm going to do a quick render. Oh, you know what I'm going to have to do? We're going to have to do a full render on this scene, okay? Or at least a full render of the color layer. Okay, so there's our color layer render. But you'll notice that it did not change here on our color layer. And the ambient occlusion, it didn't change as well, but the ambient occlusion is sort of special, which we'll get into in a few minutes. I just want you to see what's happening here so that you can always keep this in mind. Okay, so on the direct layer, if I click on my direct layer right here, there might be a small delay. There it is. Okay, so it shows up on the direct layer, but it doesn't show up on our color layer. So when you have a problem like that, you're going to want to go ahead and select the color layer and right mouse click with that object selected and assign it that material. So now I'm switching Lambert 14. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my master layer, because what can happen here is if you double up on the images or the textures that you apply, you're going to have some sort of weird crossbleed between the two. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, so there it is. I think what we can do now is sort of go and create our own scene and just do some simple geometry and sort of, we'll sort of make our own, and I'll show you how these layers down here are set up. Okay, so I'm going to go to File. I think we'll just go to New Scene, or actually I think I have one set up already. Yeah, it's the Render Layer Start, and I'm not going to save that. Okay, so here I've created some basic geometry. You can go ahead and take a moment to do this. I just have, some objects here with some various colors attached, okay? So make yourself some simple Lamberts and blends or whatever, and, a plane. And I have a single point light here with the shadows enabled, okay? So, basically I have it set at a linear decay, and I have my ray trace shadows going there, okay? And I'm also on Mental Ray production quality settings, and I believe I have Final Gathering turned on. Let's see here. Let's go to quality, is set at production, and our features, yeah. I have Final Gathering on because it's kind of nice to know what things are going to look like with Final Gathering just for the moment. Okay, so let's just leave it at that. Pretty simple. All right, well, let's get to it. I'm going to come in here, and I think I'll get rid of the outliner for a second and take a look at the scene and come over and choose our layers over here and look at our render layers. Right now I actually have established a color channel, an ambient occlusion, and a direct. I'm going to go ahead and just right mouse click on those and delete them. I'll delete that layer. I'll delete that layer and delete that. Okay, so now we just have a default master layer, one light, and I'll go ahead and do a quick render. And I'll bring the render view over here. And this is kind of what we're getting. You know, we can compare this. I think what I'll do, we can compare this with what happens when we add our occlusion and stuff in. So I'm just going to keep this as a basis or a starting point. Okay, so there it is. Now let's go ahead and choose all of the geometry except for that light. Okay, I'm going to leave the light out. And I'm going to choose all of this geometry. And you can also do that from the outliner. Just go ahead and select everything. And I'm going to come over and click on this button right over here, which is going to add those to a layer. And I'm going to label this one just color. All right. So now I have a color layer. But I have no lighting in there. Okay, so if I did a render, it would just be all black. So what I want to do is I want to add an ambient light. And I have one in the scene already here, okay? But it's hidden, so I'll go ahead and go to Window. Let's just display. Let's just show that selection. All right. And you'll see where it shows up on the master layer. Let's see if I can get that to show up. Now, on the master layer, I have to do the same thing, show selection, okay? So there it is. The ambient light basically just, throws out a simple, light that raises the value of everything up or down, okay? And with this light, you're going to create an ambient light right now. And we're going to go to its properties first. And you want to make sure, I'm going to set this to 1, and I'm going to make sure that the ambient shade is at 0, okay? We don't want to have any ambient shading on that. Just because we just want the light and we don't want it to calculate shadows or anything else, okay? So there it is. And let's go back to our layer editor on our channel box here. Now it's on the master layer, but if I switch over to color, you'll see where that icon for that light disappeared, okay? Well, we need to right mouse click on the color layer and we want to add that selected object. So now you can see it's visible, in the viewport and in the scene, okay? So we're going to do a quick render. Let's kind of get up here. And I'm going to do a quick render. We're going to see what happens. Technically it should look pretty boring. Yep, and there it is. It's just color. And, there is a shadow that's coming off of here right now, which I'm going to isolate and find out why. But for the moment, that's what's happening. Okay, so let's see. Let's take our light here, and we're going to maybe bring the value down a little bit. We'll go ahead and go back to our attributes under our ambient light shape. And I'm going to sort of lower this to midway. And we'll do another quick render. And essentially, you can see where it's just sort of altering the overall color value of what these colors are. So technically, when you're making a composite, it might be better to stay in the middle somewhere, between 5 and 9, even at a value of 1, because you can always reduce that later, okay? So in this case, I'll leave it at a default of 1. All right. So now we have the color layer. I'm going to go ahead and switch over here and take a look at that. And we're going to make another layer, okay? But we're not going to include this light. We're going to include the point light that we created out here. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to select all of the geometry, and I'm going to right mouse or shift and click on our point light right there, and I'm going to create a layer. All right, so now that's the layer right there, and we're going to name this one ambient. Actually, yeah, and name it AOCC, ambient occlusion. Now, it doesn't really matter if this light is in the scene for an ambient occlusion, because by default this is going to be assigned a shader when we set up this layer. So it doesn't really matter if you have lights in this scene or not. But in this case, let's just hide it or remove it. I'm not going to do that. I had everything selected, so I just want to select that light, and I'm going to go to the ambient occlusion and remove that object. Okay, now on this layer, because it's pretty common to add in an ambient occlusion, if you right mouse click and come down to the bottom to attributes right here, you're going to see, well, hopefully you're going to see some attributes for it. Let me try that again. I'm going to right mouse click, I'm going to come down, go to attributes, click on there, and you should get something that looks like this. Now, if you can't find that, the easy way to get to it is to look in a couple of different places. You can open that up over here. Well, actually, we haven't assigned an ambient occlusion yet. We haven't really assigned that anything yet. So what we're going to do is hit presets first and come down and go to occlusion. Okay, well, automatically everything should go black, and now you should have this surface shader. So here's my surface shader 3. Yours will probably say 1. Okay, mine just will say 3 because I've done this just to test it out. If you need to get over to those properties, click in the little box right there, and now you have, control of your ambient occlusion. So by default, let's just see what happens. I'm going to do a render now, and I'm going to make sure that over here in my render layer that I have that selected. I'm going to deselect the color for the moment because I just want to see what's happening with this ambient occlusion. So I'll save that right there, and we'll do a render for the ambient occlusion. Okay, and this is just default values at the moment, and it's doing its thing, and there it is. Now, the thing about the ambient occlusion is that, it's supposed to fill in darkness in the cracks and crevices, and it's not really supposed to creep out, into your object that much, okay? So just keep that in mind. A little bit of ambient occlusion can go a long way, and if you overdo it, it just adds a whole lot of time in your render, and it isn't necessarily all that needed, okay? So I'm going to come over here, and let's take a look at, I'm going to go ahead and click on my layer here, right mouse click, go to attributes, and hopefully it will pull up this AOCC, our ambient occlusion. And now you can see where it's assigned this shading group, which is set 3, or that, surface shader number 3. So I can click on this, and I can get over here into the surface shader, and then I can click on it again, and now I have my ambient occlusion settings. Okay, so to make the quality better, it's at 16 now, and I'm noticing that it's a little grainy, so I could set that up to 32 or something. I'll go ahead and set it to 32 for a little bit better quality. Now, the interesting thing about the ambient occlusion with these render layers is that it's always a tug-of-war between your max distance and the fall off. Okay, right now we're just seeing default values. So in max distance, I'm going to say put a value of 1, okay? And we're going to sort of do let's just do a full render. I'm going to save that one. And right away, you'll notice where the ambient occlusion is now showing up kind of where it should, in the cracks and crevices, okay? So that's probably a good option for this ambient occlusion. But let's take a look at what happens when we take that max distance up to, say, something like, let's take it to 100, just for kicks and grins. I'll do a save on that, and we'll do another render on here. Okay, so you can see as I bring that max distance up, there's a lot more that's being added to the ambient occlusion. And Let me do a quick save on this. All right, I'll save that. Okay, so there's a max distance of 100. Here it is at 1. And here is the default. And normally it starts at 0 default. And, you know, given the size of your scene or whatever, it's hard to say. It's always best to sort of move that away from the 0 default value and, you know, give it a 1 or a 50. But that's kind of what you're looking at there. Okay, here was an 8-second return for the ambient occlusion on the render time. And if I go over here to where we switched it up to 100, there's now a 20-second return. Okay, so you're going to take a super huge hit if you don't manage your ambient occlusion right. Okay, your render times will be outrageous if you start getting crazy here. So I'm going to reset that max distance to 1, and I'm going to take the fall off. You know, in this case, it's going to take a lot of rendering to figure out what's happening with it, but I'll take the fall off to say like 8. And we have a max distance of 1. So I'll save that. We'll take another render. And you can see where the fall off value now is a little bit greater than what we had before. So technically, I'll go ahead and save this render. There it is with what we just did, and there it is right there when it was at 1 and fall off at 0 or 1 or whatever the default was. Okay, so there it is there, and now you can see where the fall off is giving it a little bit greater, you know, fall off there. And still it's coming in at about 10 seconds. So I'll go ahead and just leave it there for the moment, and we'll get on with it. So those are the critical things that have to do with your ambient occlusion layer. All right, so let's go on to the last part here. I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to grab all this geometry, and I'm going to grab the point light that we had in here before, and I'm going to create another layer. All right, and there it is, and I'm going to label this one, say like direct light, or, you know, whatever works for you. So there's my direct light. I'm going to turn off my ambient occlusion for a second here, and I'm going to come in here and we're going to do a quick render. We don't really have to do a preset on this for anything because this is just the lighting. Okay, when this pass is created, it's basically just going to calculate the lighting for here. Okay, so there it is, and okay, we'll just go with that just out of ease. Okay, so now, if you look at what's going on down here, these 3 channels now, I'm going to enact them all, but one is normal, another one's a normal layer, and this direct is saying normal. Well, technically, because we're adding one on top of another down here, we want to make sure that we choose the right settings for how these layers react. And this is a lot like Photoshop, okay? Photoshop deals in layers. Whatever layer you see is the layer that's going to be rendered. And unless you have, you know, screens or, you know, some other kind of multiplying things going on, you're only going to see what's being rendered in that layer. Okay? So in this case, we want to see what all of these look like together. So what I can do is with the color layer, I can leave it normal. And with the ambient occlusion right here, I want to switch this up to a multiply. Okay, I'm going to hit multiply. And what that's going to do is it's going to multiply the ambient occlusion with this color layer. And in the direct light layer up here, what I want is I want to set that to screen so that this is basically just screened over the top of these two. So that'll be the correct combination to get, you know, a pretty good looking render. So now that we have them all chosen there, you can sort of hit your options and be aware that you want to turn on render all layers, okay? Because if you don't, it's just going to render one layer here if you have that one enacted, or if you're selected here, it's just going to render that layer. So I want to select all layers right there. And you know, you have some other options in here, okay? So just sort of be aware that you have that. But yeah, we want to render all layers. All right, so now we're ready to do a quick test. and hopefully, hopefully everything comes out okay. So there it is. There's our color pass. Pretty bright. And then it's going to come in and add that ambient occlusion layer, and you can see where that fall off is going where we thought it would. Add some nice kind of detail to the edges. And now it's going to go ahead and add in the light and shadows. Okay, so there it is. All right, so those are the fundamentals behind at least this kind of simplistic setup. And it's really a simple setup. So that you can get, some pretty good looking results. Obviously, I fine-tuned this a lot just because of the lighting values and such. But, by using just these 3 layers right here, I kind of came out with a pretty good looking render to start off to pre-visualize some stuff. I have a object in here for human scale, sort of. So now I can animate this scene and then have a batch render done. And if you had this set at 600 frames, Maya would output 600 frames for your color, 600 frames for the ambient occlusion, and 600 frames for the direct light. So you could composite those all together, in After Effects or something. So super cool. Okay, now remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You could be doing, a diffusion layer. You could be doing like a specular, or a diffuse lighting layer, plus your transparency layers, plus your shadow layers, plus all sorts of different stuff. And I might touch upon those and add to this tutorial just to show what might happen when some more shiny stuff is in here. But in this case, I just have a lot of flat materials going on, and I don't really have any need to do, full-on layers for everything just to get the job done. So there you go. Okay? So, hey, I hope I haven't bored you. But that's the here and the now, how you put these things together. Okay? So great. Thanks for watching. As always, be a really good person, because that makes the world a better place. And also, read a book, read the manual, read the help section, read anything you can concerning Maya. All right, and a book too for your brain. So there you go. All right. Thanks for watching. Hope you had fun, and we'll see you for the next one.